breaths were held and the whole world is now waiting for good news from the Ukraine-Russia war front before the new year. In the last week of December, we stated that the intensity of the clashes on the front lines of Ukraine, excluding the Bakhmut front, decreased. But a few days ago, the invading Russian army had changed this situation. Putin's armed forces fired more than 120 missiles at Kiev, Odessa, Sumy, and many parts of Ukraine. Surprisingly, the Ukrainian Defense Forces managed to shoot down about 90% of these 120 missiles launched. Of course, the air defense system supplied to Kiev by the USA and Western Europe have a large share in this. USA's NASAMS, French Crotal, German Iris-Ts, and Jeopard defense systems, Speed anti-missile systems, they are all gods of war. Air defense systems with 100% performance saved the Ukrainians' day. However, New Year's Eve would still be dark for many citizens in Ukraine, but that's okay because their faith lights up the night. While Russia returned empty-handed from these attacks, Ukraine continued its cross-border operations on the same dates. According to the claims of Russian officials and media channels, Kiev also targeted the Russian city of Belgorod during the same time period when the Moscow army fired 120 missiles into Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is literally a war of intelligence and will. And even at the same time as these two incidents, a drone controlled by Moscow army soldiers destroyed the Russian S-300 missile system in the Bryansk region of Russia. What was happening on the battlefield? While tension and violence swept across the war fronts, were both countries retaliating against each other? Judging by the recent incidents, these possibilities do not sound surprising at all. The gigantic fire that broke out at the headquarters of the 150th Russian Rifle Division of the Russian Army in the Rostov region of Russia yesterday opened the door to mysterious possibilities. Has Ukraine started operations on the Russian borders again? Emergency alarms were sounding in Rostov Oblast on Russia's Black Sea coast. Did the fire have anything to do with the war? Was already increasing the question marks in minds. The building in Rostov where the 150th Russian Rifle Division was located surrendered to the flames. When we think about it for a short time, is it a coincidence that such a severe fire broke out in a military strategic center, especially when the course of the war is so critical and tense right now? Don't you think it's strange that the building belonging to the Russian division in Rostov, when the Ukrainian armed forces increased their cross-border operations so much? Now let's take a look at the details of this curtain of secrecy. We have stated that a huge fire broke out in the building where the 150th Rifle Division is located in the village of Persyanovskoye in the Rostov region of Russia, for an unknown reason at the moment. And the shocking footage of this fire was immediately shared on social media. The severity of the fire, the entire area of the building, and the explosions are clearly evident in the video taken by the camera that sees the scene from the opposite side. There was no statement about the loss of life or the number of injured at the moment. But this fire in Rostov was so fierce that the roof of the building was not visible from the flames and smoke. This building, which currently houses the 150th Russian Rifle Division, became completely unusable after the fire. Many emergency services were dispatched to the building where this Russian division was located in Rostov, which was captured by the Russian fire. In addition, the capital of Russia, which experienced shock after shock, was one of the cities that surrendered to the flames. Just days after the fire in Rostov, a massive fire broke out inside the garage units at 3 Sokolynaya Gora in Moscow, and this stunning fire lasted for more than 4 hours. This event occurred in the midst of a series of mysterious periods filled with suspicions that a war-related sabotage in Ukraine was a cause of some of the fires. After this striking event in the capital, the Russian local population intensified their reaction against the Moscow regime. The reason for this is that there is a very large audience in Russia who thinks that the source of these negative events is the war in Ukraine. These people think that the war waged by leader Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, which he calls a special military operation, directly harms Russia, and that the Ukrainian army continues its cross-border operations in this war to save its independence. But the fire and explosion events in Russia were not limited to Moscow. While tensions between citizens in Russia escalated so much, after the fire incident in the capital in Moscow, a mysterious explosion occurred in the Russian natural gas pipeline, this time feeding Europe. The incident occurred in the Chavushia region, 700 kilometers east of Moscow, on a pipeline that carries Siberian natural gas to European markets. 3 people were killed in an explosion in a section of the Urengoy, Pomary, and Uzhhorod pipeline. Chuvashia Governor Oleg Nikolayev announced on television that it is not yet clear how long it will take to repair the part of the pipeline cut by the explosion. In addition, the regional branch of Russia's state-controlled Gazprom natural gas giant stated that gas transit volumes were not affected by the explosion as the supply continues on parallel lines. British intelligence announced last week that the ammunition reserve of the Moscow army had fallen to dangerous levels. According to British officials, there was a possibility that Russia would either launch a final major offensive or continue with small but sustained attacks until the spring offensive planned after the new year. When we think about it, the British Security Service was, in a way, right. But why did Russia suddenly carry out such a violent attack on the whole of Ukraine after the crushing defeats in Bakhmut? Actually, the answer is quite simple. Ukraine has long humiliated the Moscow administration with its drone attacks on Russia's military air bases. Heavy bomber aircraft from these military bases were moved to safe areas by the Russian army. But some of these Russian heavy bombers were badly damaged during the Ukrainian airstrikes. The drone attacks at the Engels Air Base, the Kursk explosions, the air operations in Diaghilevo, all these events put Russia in a depression until the end of December. In particular, the Engels Air Base has been attacked 3 times since the beginning of December. The first attack took place in the first week of December. Then, when the dates showed December 26th, a drone attack occurred on this base again. And finally, on Thursday, December 29th, the last drone attack occurred in Engels. The territory of Russia was no longer safe, and it was clear that something was wrong in this country. Because Russia, which has become the focal point of fires and explosions, was waking up to every new day with negative news. Especially the capital Moscow has witnessed huge fires in the last few months. In addition, the explosion events spread to many cities of Russia. The allegations that these events that took place in Russia, which could not get rid of the flames, had a connection with the Ukrainian war, worried the Moscow administration, because the conflicts had moved on to Russian territory. The Moscow administration blamed the Kiev administration for many attacks within Russia. There is really no reason why the Kiev army should not do this, but there is no evidence that the Ukrainians did. When we look at it from an understanding of equal exchange, or you reap what you sow, Ukraine may have the right to do this. Currently, Russia is targeting innocent civilians and energy infrastructures of Ukraine. Despite this, only military bases and the resources of the Moscow army are the targets of the attacks on the Russian borders. What was going on in Russia? Not 1, not 2, but dozens of fires, explosions, and a series of interesting events haunted Putin's country, while Ukraine's difficult struggle on the battlefield was alleviated by this. Because hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens, who are not all satisfied with the situation, actively serving in the army and mobilized Russians, take refuge in Ukraine or leave Russia completely in order to save their lives by escaping the frenzied Putin's anger and borderless fury. Particularly, most of the soldiers mobilized to the Moscow army on the Ukrainian fronts are deserting or surrendering to the Ukrainian army due to the events taking place in Russia these days and the course of the battlefield. Meanwhile, the number of surrendered Russian soldiers continues to rise towards record numbers. Citizens in Russia, on the other hand, either leave Russia in order to establish a new life in Europe because they do not feel comfortable and safe in their country, or they turn against Putin and support Ukraine's war of independence. Giant protest actions against both Vladimir Putin's regime and war policies and the brutal offensive operations against Ukraine continue at full speed in Russia. Neither among Russian citizens nor among innocent Ukrainian people has lost their enthusiasm for the new year due to Moscow's war policies that disregard these humanitarian values. We hope 2023 can change this situation for Ukraine. Thank you for watching us.